Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Michael Sloan bought his dream home far from the chaos of city life, he thought peace had finally arrived. But 4 days later, a knock at the door would ignite a battle against a ruthless HOA, forged documents, and a conspiracy that reached all the way to the federal level. When I first stepped out of the moving truck and onto the gravel drive of my new home, it was like exhaling for the first time in years. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the southern hills of Austin, and all I could hear was wind and cicadas. No honking, no neighbors yelling about recycling bins, no security patrols giving you the stink eye because your lawn was a quarter-inch too high. Just peace. My name's Michael Sloan, 38 years old, former military systems engineer, now a remote working data analyst. After spending the better part of my adult life either stationed overseas or boxed into concrete apartment blocks in LA, this house was supposed to be the exhale. We paid cash, no mortgage, no liens, no strings. My wife Becky and I poured every ounce of our post-military savings into this place. A full renovation, solar panel installation, modern smart locks, even a backup generator. I wanted independence, not just from banks, but from people, especially the HOA kind. That's why I was so goddamn careful during the purchase. I cross-referenced the property lines with county records, pulled the plat maps, and triple-checked the deed. The property was a freehold parcel, not under any HOA jurisdiction. Technically, it touched the boundary of Clear Ridge Estates on one side, an overly manicured HOA community with matching mailboxes and matching personalities, but our driveway opened onto a county-maintained road. Separate utilities, separate sewer, separate everything. They couldn't touch us, or so I thought. 4 days after we moved in, while I was still wrestling with the final box labeled random kitchen shit, I heard a knock. Not a friendly, neighborly knock. A flat, businesslike knock that vibrated with unnecessary authority. I opened the door and was greeted by a blonde bob haircut, pastel blouse, clipboard, and the kind of tight-lipped smile you only see in HOA newsletters. Good afternoon. I'm Karen Bleeder, president of the Clear Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, she said, her eyes already scanning past me into my hallway. Behind her stood 2 men in polo shirts with tablets and the kind of smug, silent presence that screamed unpaid volunteers with too much free time. We're here to conduct a visual compliance survey, she continued, like that was a normal thing to say to someone who hadn't asked them to be there. We've received reports that your front windows may not conform to the community standard. Also, your exterior paint tone doesn't align with our approved palette. I blinked. I'm sorry, are you under the impression this property is part of your HOA? Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes twitched. Well, this home borders our community and borders are not jurisdiction, I cut in, keeping my voice steady. This property is independent. I confirmed that with the county, with my attorney, and with your own public zoning maps. You don't have authority here. There was a brief silence, heavy and pulsing with tension. One of the tablet guys pretended to check something on his screen. Karen didn't blink. Nevertheless, she said coolly, we're documenting visible discrepancies for internal records. These issues may affect community property values. And I may affect your civil liability if you step 1 foot beyond my threshold without permission, I said, stepping forward. You're now officially trespassing. That finally got her attention. Her lips pinched into a thin white line. She tilted her chin up like she'd just tasted something sour and fake smiled again. Very well. I'll make a note of your resistance. She didn't even say goodbye. She just turned and walked back to the sidewalk with her clipboard goons trailing behind like hyenas behind the lioness. I stood in the doorway for a long minute after they were gone, jaw clenched, blood hot. 4 days in. 4. I didn't unpack another box that day. Instead, I reread my title documents, checked the land plat again, and started researching security cameras because I knew that smile, that tight, silent, condescending calm. That wasn't the end. It was the opening move. The next morning, something felt off before I even opened the curtains. Call it military instinct, or just that sixth sense you develop after years of apartment living and passive-aggressive neighbors. I was halfway through pouring coffee when Becky, still in her robe, glanced out of the front window and froze. Michael, what the hell? I followed her gaze. Our gate, the shiny brand new solar-powered automatic gate we had just installed 2 weeks ago, wasn't opening. The keypad was blinking red. And just beyond it, right across our private drive. Someone had dropped 2 concrete barriers square in front of the gate like we were under goddamn siege. Yellow tape with "Community Construction in Progress" fluttered in the wind. I walked outside barefoot, hot mug in hand. The crisp morning air didn't do much to cool the rising heat in my chest. Up close, I could see it wasn't even done professionally. No cones, no safety signs, just big-ass blocks dumped right in front of my driveway, cutting me off from the road. My gate was still trying to open, gears humming, sensors blinking, but there was nowhere for it to go. Taped to the steel was a laminated notice. I ripped it off. Access temporarily restricted. Routine HOA maintenance. Use of road suspended per Section 14. The road, my road. This wasn't a shared access path. This was the private drive that led from my house straight out to a county easement, separate from Clear Ridge Estates entirely. We weren't even on their goddamn utilities grid. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line first. The dispatcher took down the info with the kind of tired voice you use when you're already picturing the paperwork. Then I called the number listed on the laminated notice. It rang twice before I heard her voice. "Karen Bleeder," she chirped, sounding entirely too pleased with herself. "This is Michael Sloan. You want to explain why you've blockaded my property?" There was a pause. A long one. Then smoothly. "As noted on the posted notice, there is currently scheduled maintenance on the roadway adjoining your entrance. Per community policy, access may be temporarily suspended for safety." "Karen," I said, voice low, "you don't own that road. You don't maintain it. It's not part of your HOA boundary." "That's a common misconception," she replied, her voice suddenly cooler. "That stretch of roadway was included in an amendment filed during the 2019 HOA expansion. It's currently being reviewed by the board for maintenance inclusion." I actually laughed. "Karen, you mean to tell me your board is reviewing whether they own the road after you blockaded it?" She hung up. Just like that. I didn't even bother chasing the logic. I walked back into the garage, grabbed my bolt cutters and a pry bar, and went to work. The HOA might love their tape and laminated notices, but I loved my power tools more. I started with the chains, snapping the links in under 30 seconds. The blocks were a different story. They were heavy. Overkill for a driveway stunt, but with a bit of leverage and a steel pipe, I managed to get one dragged to the side just enough to squeeze my truck out. While I worked, Becky set up a temporary sign by the mailbox. "Private road. Not HOA property. Blocking access is a crime." It didn't stop the stares. People drove by in their identical SUVs, slowing just long enough to gawk. One guy even took photos from his window, like I was committing war crimes by moving a few cinder blocks off my own damn driveway. I wasn't done. That evening, I installed 2 HD security cameras, one on the gate, one facing the street, motion-activated, cloud-backed, with license plate recognition. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought a retractable steel bollard system. Becky thought I was overreacting. I told her I wasn't reacting enough. The next day, I filed a complaint with the Travis County Road and Bridge Department. When I mentioned the road dispute, the clerk on the phone sounded intrigued and said, "That doesn't sound right. If it's a private easement, the HOA has zero claim. We'll pull the parcel file and get back to you." They did, 2 days later, with a short but beautiful answer. "That roadway belongs to parcel 421B. U. It's not HOA managed. They've got no jurisdiction." I printed that email out, laminated it, and posted it on both sides of my mailbox, just for good measure. Then I waited. No more calls, no more barriers. But no apologies either. Karen didn't show up again. Not in person. Not even to gloat. That was the part that bugged me most. The silence. It was the kind of silence you feel before a thunderstorm. It was a Wednesday morning, just after 9, when the door wouldn't open. I'd stepped away from my desk to grab a second cup of coffee. The sun was shining. The house was quiet. Becky had taken the car to run errands, and the thought of getting a little yard work done later was already forming in my mind when I reached for the front door and turned the handle. It didn't budge. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. I tapped the keypad. No response. The screen was black. The deadbolt was electronic, brand new. Wi-Fi connected, powered by the solar grid and backed up by battery. I knew damn well it had juice last night. I'd checked the diagnostics on my phone before bed like a nerd. Now, no signs of life, no beeps, no blinking lights. I tried the back door. Same story. When I got to the garage, I found the emergency release cord cut clean off, hanging like a limp tail from the overhead opener. The manual latch was sealed from the outside. It wasn't just a glitch. Someone had locked me inside my own goddamn house. I went still. That old military switch flipped on, the one you don't even think about. I checked windows. All of them shut tight. No broken locks, just secured. Even the sliding patio door had a freshly drilled metal brace screwed in from the outside. Not mine. I rushed to my office, pulled up the camera feeds. Nothing at first. Then I scrolled back to around 5 in the morning. There they were, two figures in high-vis vests, hard hats, moving with calm precision. They approached the house like contractors on a routine call, except they weren't here to fix anything. They screwed a bolt bracket onto my back door, sealed the garage, attached some kind of mechanical fastener to the front, right over the keypad housing, then mounted a fresh sign across it. The camera on the gate caught it clearly. Access suspended, under review by Clear Ridge HOA. My laugh was sharp and short, like a bark. I dialed 911. Operator, what's your emergency? I've been illegally locked inside my home, I said. I'm the property owner. I am being forcibly confined. That got their attention. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I confirmed my location, verified that I was physically safe, and gave them the whole story in as few words as possible. 5 minutes later, 2 sheriff's units rolled up. I watched them through the narrow blinds as they stepped out, took one look at the blocked keypad, and began radioing for backup. Karen showed up 15 minutes after the deputies. She arrived like someone showing up for a PTA meeting. White blouse, folder under one arm, sunglasses, and that same frozen sorority smile mask. I watched her walk up to the cops, chatting with them like she was doing them a favor. I turned on the speaker from my phone, connected to the gate camera's audio. Temporary action, she was saying, flipping open the folder, due to safety concerns regarding unauthorized structures and visual code violations. The board voted for a precautionary restriction of access pending review. He can exit through the garage if needed. One of the deputies pointed to the release cord. It's cut. Well, that may have been for safety as well. Liability concerns. There's equipment. It's his private residence. The other deputy cut in. You're saying your HOA voted to physically restrain a homeowner inside his own house? Karen blinked. Technically, he's adjacent to our jurisdiction. The matter of his inclusion is still being debated by the board. The access point is part of the easement corridor. Ma'am, the first deputy said, lowering his voice, none of this is legal. You can't block someone in their own home. That's a felony in this county. Possibly more. I watched her face twitch. Just slightly. They called for a locksmith. I was out within 20 minutes. Standing in my own front yard, surrounded by deputies and crime scene tape, I looked Karen right in the eyes for the first time since that clipboard parade on day 4. She didn't look smug now, but she didn't look scared either. That was the unsettling part. I filed everything according to board policy, she said coldly, as though she were the one being wronged. The documents are in this file. You're welcome to contest them during our upcoming review. One of the deputies took the folder from her. He flipped it open, then stopped. Ma'am, he said slowly, this letterhead's got a federal property code on it. Form numbers, HUD references. You file this with any government office? Karen said nothing. Because if you submitted forged HUD paperwork to the county, that's a whole different level of stupid. She froze. The deputy turned to me. Mr. Sloan, we're going to need to document everything, and you should probably talk to someone higher up. This smells like more than just trespassing. No kidding. As the cops took statements and snapped photos of the tampered locks and fraudulent signage, I sat on the porch and watched Karen walk back to her car. For the first time, she didn't look back. She knew she crossed a line. And I had it all on tape. Becky got home just after noon that same day. She nearly dropped the groceries when she saw the cruiser in our driveway and 2 deputies still poking around with clipboards. One of them was photographing the metal bracket they'd removed from the back door, holding it like a piece of evidence from a crime scene. What the hell happened? She asked as I met her at the car. I got imprisoned in my own house, I said flatly. By the HOA. Her jaw dropped. They what? I gave her the short version while we carried the bags in. She kept stopping mid-step, blinking like I was telling her some Reddit thread come to life. We didn't even finish unpacking before I pulled up the footage for her. When she saw the 2 men in vests screwing metal restraints into our home at dawn, her face went pale. I should have been here, she whispered. You'd have just been locked in with me. Later that week, while I was compiling documentation for the lawyer, timestamps, video footage, printed maps, copies of the fraudulent notice Karen had handed over, Becky stepped out into the yard to water her plants. The garden had become her sanctuary since we moved in. Raised beds along the side fence, some shrubs by the patio, a little gravel walking path. She'd carved the whole space herself, and it was beautiful in that handmade, lopsided kind of way. About 10 minutes later, I heard her scream. Not a startled yell, a scream. Primal, reflexive pain. I sprinted out back barefoot and found her on her knees in the grass, hands covering her face. She was crying, coughing, gasping. One side of her face was red and wet. A can of pepper spray was lying on the ground 5 feet away. Standing 10 feet from her, arms crossed, was a woman I'd seen once or twice at the HOA kiosk near the community pool. Tan sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and an expression like Becky had just insulted her poodle. She crossed the landscaping boundary. The woman snapped before I even spoke. I didn't ask permission. I tackled her. Not a full-body slam, but enough to knock her off balance and pin her arms until she dropped whatever was still in her hands. A second canister, more pepper spray. Within 2 minutes, the police were back. Same 2 deputies, probably getting sick of our address by now. Becky was treated by EMTs. Mild chemical burn, blurry vision, elevated blood pressure. She refused to go to the ER, but I was 2 seconds away from dragging her there myself. The woman's name was Diane Hughes, secretary of the Clear Ridge HOA board. She told the cops, on record, that Becky had entered protected landscape space and was behaving suspiciously. It would have been laughable if it wasn't horrifying. The deputies asked if Diane had proof this protected area was HOA managed land. She said yes. I said no. So I went inside, pulled the documents from the filing cabinet, and returned with a certified copy of our parcel boundaries, dated, signed, and notarized. It included the very strip of land where Becky had been attacked. Clear Ridge tried to annex it last year, I explained. Filed a zoning request that got denied by the county. They tried again this year, but never filed anything officially. It's ours. It's been ours since purchase. Hell, the gravel Becky laid is visible on satellite. The deputy turned to Diane. You knew this wasn't HOA property. Her lips twitched. Karen said, You acted with physical force. He cut in. You assaulted someone on private property. Diane was cuffed and read her rights right there on our lawn. Karen didn't show up that day, but her absence was louder than any confrontation. The next morning, I got a call from our attorney, Sam Richter. He said he'd been contacted by someone from the Travis County Recorder's Office, someone whose name he wouldn't repeat over the phone, who'd flagged our address during a routine audit of HOA filings. Apparently, there was anomalous zoning activity involving our parcel initiated months before we even moved in. The interesting part, Sam said, is that someone used your parcel number to create an internal annexation claim in the HOA's database. But it never reached the county. It was held in limbo, unfiled, but used internally to justify enforcement. They created a fake border, I muttered. Exactly. On paper, you're outside the HOA, but to them, they're pretending you're already in. He paused. And Michael, the forms they used, the ones justifying that internal change, they're stamped with what looks like HUD regional authorization. That's federal property code. If they forged that? He let the implication hang in the air. A day later, a federal agent showed up at my door, Special Agent Laura Hannity, Department of Housing and Urban Development, black blazer, badge, no bullshit. I've been asked to collect documents regarding potential fraudulent activity involving residential parcel 421B, she said. You are the primary title holder. Yes. Then I'll need every document you've received from Clear Ridge Estates. Notices, correspondence, maps, anything with HUD language or property boundary claims. She didn't smile, didn't crack a joke. Just went straight to business, scanning files and asking laser-sharp questions. Before she left, I asked, Is this serious? If someone's altering federal property boundary records or using HUD code fraudulently, she said, it's a federal crime. Crosses state lines if they used federal filing systems. That's interjurisdictional fraud at minimum. She gave me a card and left. And just like that, we weren't just dealing with entitled neighbors anymore. We were in federal territory. The night after Agent Hannity left, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. I'd been in combat zones where sleep deprivation was the least of your problems, but because for the first time since this war with the HOA began, I realized something was off. More than off. Wrong in a deeper, orchestrated kind of way. Karen was petty, sure. Power tripping, absolutely. But now, pepper spraying my wife, bolting me inside my house, submitting falsified documents with federal markings? That wasn't garden variety HOA tyranny. That was something else. I started going back through everything. Old emails, scanned notices, archived records from the HOA website. Thank you, Wayback Machine. And even news articles about Clear Ridge Estates going back 5 years. A name kept popping up. Greg Morton, treasurer of the HOA. No photos online. Not a single interview or Facebook profile. But he'd signed nearly every financial statement since the HOA expanded in 2019. The same year, Karen revised the boundaries. I found a grainy image of him in a group photo at some community chili cook-off. Mid-40s, generic haircut, generic golf shirt, generic face. The kind of man who could blend into drywall. Except when I ran a background check through a buddy of mine. Ex-military, now private security consultant. I got a hit. Greg Morton wasn't just a bored suburbanite. He was an acquisitions advisor for Lancer Horizons Group, a real estate development firm with projects up and down the Texas corridor. A company known for community revitalization, which is corporate speak for buying up distressed or undervalued land, rezoning it, and flipping it into overpriced townhomes. They had no public link to Clear Ridge Estates. Until now. I brought the info to Sam, my lawyer, the next morning. He stared at the printouts, the tax records, the filings, and exhaled like a man seeing the shape of a puzzle he didn't realize he was solving. "This is a front," he said finally. They embedded Morton on the HOA board to identify properties adjacent to the community, pressure the owners through extrajudicial enforcement tactics, devalue the parcel, and acquire it cheaply through amicable purchase. Or by lawsuit. Exhaustion, I added. Or intimidation. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was the attack dog. Morton was the one holding the leash. And behind them, a multi-million-dollar development firm with plans to extend Clear Ridge's footprint by several blocks. My parcel was a missing tooth in their perfect smile, and they were trying to yank it out. That afternoon, we received a certified envelope, no return address. Inside was a formal offer to purchase our home and land for 30% under market value. A pre-filled quitclaim deed was attached. A sticky note read, "Consider this an opportunity to walk away peacefully." Becky stared at it like it was a threat, not a proposal, because it was. I handed it over to Agent Hannity during our next meeting. She didn't react much, just added it to the file, but she did mutter, "Stupid move. Documented coercion." By then, she'd already started looping in other federal departments, wire fraud, forgery, misuse of government property codes. If Lancer Horizons had accessed HUD's back-end zoning request systems, even indirectly, it meant crossing into federal servers, and that meant interstate cyber fraud, a whole different level of felony. Meanwhile, the local temperature was rising. Karen stopped showing up in person, but the HOA newsletter, yes, an actual printed newsletter, began running strange little blurbs. Unregistered residents are reminded that community expectations apply regardless of individual status. And disruptive individuals may find themselves facing civil consequences for prolonged non-compliance. Cute. Becky wanted to burn every copy that landed in our mailbox, but I told her to save them. Evidence, after all, is just pettiness with a timestamp. By the end of the week, Agent Hannity had served subpoenas to the Clear Ridge HOA, Karen Bleeder, and Greg Morton. 2 days later, Morton vanished. Just gone. Didn't show up to the HOA budget meeting. His name was quietly removed from the website. Calls to his listed number got a robotic voicemail, no forwarding address. But I wasn't surprised. Lancer Horizons had moved their piece off the board, but not in time. Hannity had already traced a series of shell property purchases by an LLC connected to Morton, one of which bordered our back fence. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "They were trying to box you in. Buy everything around you, build tight density housing, and leave you with a property that's unsellable unless you agreed to zoning changes. It's a long con, and it's not just happening here." "Why us?" I asked. "Because your land is flat, already utility separated, and sits on a traffic node Lancer's been eyeing for 2 years. Because you didn't have a mortgage. No bank to negotiate with. No lien holder to appease. Just one owner who wouldn't play. They thought I'd fold. Instead, they handed me every weapon I needed to burn them to the ground. It started like a whisper. One local news station, just a filler segment on homeowner disputes, aired a story titled "Veteran Locked in Own Home by HOA." They used my footage, blurred Karen's face but left the clipboard and pastel sweater clearly visible. Then came a second story. Then a third. By the end of the week, I had emails from 5 reporters, 3 podcast producers, and someone claiming to represent a Netflix-adjacent documentary brand, whatever the hell that meant. But media coverage was nothing compared to what hit Clear Ridge next. Subpoenas landed like meteorites. The federal court filings named Karen Bleeder, Greg Morton, the Clear Ridge HOA board, and Lancer Horizons Group as defendants in an interstate civil conspiracy to defraud, restrict liberty, and unlawfully seize private property using fabricated legal structures. Agent Hannity laid it out in plain language. This isn't just HOA overreach. This is racketeering. They used falsified documents, intimidation tactics, and coordinated fraud across multiple jurisdictions. It qualifies under the RICO Act. Karen was served first. Becky and I watched it from our living room via our gate camera feed, which now had over 6,000 subscribers since I started uploading the best clips to YouTube. Karen came out of her home in full business attire, visibly trembling, and asked the federal agent if she could make a quick call first. She wasn't arrested, not yet. But she was officially under federal investigation, and that meant no more hiding behind HOA jargon. Greg Morton, meanwhile, was found at a hotel in New Mexico, registered under an alias, the U.S. Marshals brought him in for questioning, and within 24 hours, he was singing like a jukebox. According to court documents later made public, Morton confessed to acting as an embedded asset for Lancer Horizons. His job was to identify vulnerable parcels for absorption into community development, which was a polite way of saying harass, corner, and acquire. Karen's name was all over the internal memos. She'd authorized letters, notices, even the forged federal documents bearing HUD references. And while she insisted she believed them to be real, the metadata in the files, traced to her personal laptop, told a different story. The court unsealed a treasure trove of evidence. Email chains between Morton and Lancer execs discussing my home, how non-compliant owners need a push, and one note that read, "Let Bleeder run the op. She likes a fight." Yeah, real cute. When the pretrial hearings began, I was called to testify. Becky, too. We walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Austin hand in hand, past rows of press cameras, and into a courtroom full of suits and tight jaws. I told my story. From the first clipboard knock to the bolt on my front door, from the pepper spray to the buyout attempt. When I finished, the judge asked only one question. "Do you feel safe in your home now, Mr. Sloan?" I looked at Karen. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at the table. "Not yet," I said. Back at home, Becky and I began installing floodlights, backup fencing, and perimeter alarms, not because we were scared, but because we weren't done fighting. A week later, the Department of Justice announced a new initiative, HOA Integrity Watch, a task force focused on abusive HOAs and their partnerships with real estate developers. My case, it would be the flagship example. Lancer Horizons CEO tried to issue a press release distancing the company from Morton, calling him an unsanctioned rogue contractor, but Agent Hannity leaked the expense records. Morton's HOA stipend had been paid via a company account with the memo line, "Civic Relations, Clear Ridge Ops." Good luck scrubbing that. The federal case moved faster than I expected. Karen's legal team made a motion to dismiss. Denied. They tried to shift blame to Morton. Denied. They tried to argue that the HOA was a quasi-governmental body and thus immune to civil action. That one got them laughed out of the courtroom. More residents began coming forward, not just from Clear Ridge, but from other neighborhoods. People with eerily similar stories. Unexpected road closures, surprise rule changes, aggressive buyout offers, disappearing board members. The case wasn't just mine anymore. It was everyone's. The courthouse was cold. Not physically. The AC was fine. But the kind of cold that comes from marble floors, echoing silence, and the weight of too many lives being dragged across polished wood. I stood just outside courtroom 4C, suit slightly too tight, tie crooked from Becky's shaky hands. She smiled at me with that forced, proud expression she wore when things got too big to process. Inside, the federal judge took her seat and read from a bench packet that looked thicker than a phone book. The room was packed. Press, attorneys, and a few Clear Ridge residents brave enough to see how deep their HOA rabbit hole went. Karen sat at the defendant's table, lips tight, jaw locked, hair still in that stiff bob, but the mask had cracked. She looked smaller now. Not broken, but no longer untouchable. Greg Morton wasn't present. He'd taken a plea deal weeks earlier in exchange for full cooperation. He gave them everything: names, dates, emails, audio recordings. Hell, he even turned over a hard drive from a private server Lancer Horizons had been using to plan community expansions through covert HOA infiltration. I watched the court clerk stand and begin the official reading of the verdicts. Karen Bleeder, guilty on 5 counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of interstate commerce, forgery of federal property records, unlawful detention, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Greg Morton pled guilty. 12 years reduced to 8, with parole eligibility in 5, plus full restitution. Clear Ridge Estates, HOA, officially dissolved under federal mandate. All assets frozen, pending civil redistribution to harmed parties. Its status as a non-profit entity was revoked. Lancer Horizons Group, fined $45 million, ordered to cease all current Texas operations pending further investigation. Their executive board, 8 smug men in suits, would face a separate criminal trial later that year. And me? I was awarded $300,000 in compensatory damages, plus legal costs, plus additional punitive damages related to emotional distress and trespass. Becky cried when the judge said the number. I didn't. I just nodded once like a man saluting his own trench. But money wasn't the real prize. Truth was accountability. The court moved to sentencing a week later. Karen sat silent while the judge read her punishment: 6 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 4. Her sentence was bundled with a court order barring her from serving on any residential board, nonprofit, or municipal planning committee for life. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just signed the paperwork and was led away in cuffs, head high. I respected that in a way. She went down like a captain who thought the iceberg was bluffing. As for the rest of the HOA board, most of them took plea deals, community service, fines, and 2-year bans from holding any fiduciary responsibilities. A few tried to plead ignorance. It didn't work. Federal courts aren't as fond of "I didn't read the emails" as local zoning boards are, and then came the final blow. The Department of Justice, emboldened by our case, launched a statewide audit of every HOA formed since 2010, looking for similar patterns: sudden boundary expansions, shell LLCs tied to developers, harassment complaints, anomalous zoning. Activity. I hadn't just blown up a fence. I'd cracked a wall. After everything was signed, stamped, and sealed, I walked out of that courthouse and exhaled. The kind of exhale you only get when something heavy leaves your chest, like a lung full of bricks you didn't realize you were carrying. That night, Becky and I sat in the backyard, wine in hand, watching the moon reflect off the new 8-foot privacy wall I'd had built along the perimeter: reinforced concrete, custom steel gate, infrared cameras, motion-triggered floodlights. I even hired a private patrol, 2 ex-Marines who liked the work and hated Karens. I'd turned my home into a fortress, but not a prison. On the front gate, mounted between 2 floodlights, I installed a custom steel plaque. It read, "Private property no HOA, no trespassing, no mercy." Becky thought it was too dramatic. I told her it was just honest. 6 months later, the grass along the edge of my driveway had finally grown back, thick and defiant, covering the last tire ruts left by those HOA bastards. You'd never know this place had been a war zone unless you looked closer. There were still signs if you knew where to look. The newer concrete in the back fence where the pepper spray incident happened had a slightly different hue. The security cameras tucked under the eaves had upgraded optics and pan-tracking AI. The gate had been replaced with a commercial-grade hydraulic unit strong enough to stop a pickup at speed. Overkill? Maybe. But I'd learned the hard way that paranoia is just foresight with scars. Clear Ridge Estates, that smug little enclave with its uniform hedges and Stepford smiles, looked hollow now. Stripped of its power, its HOA disbanded. The community was fraying at the edges. Their ornamental fountain had stopped running. 2 of the tennis courts were padlocked with pending maintenance signs that never got updated. Rumor had it the landscapers quit when the funds dried up. Karen's house was up for sale, bank-owned. She tried to transfer the deed to a relative before sentencing, but the court flagged it as fraudulent conveyance. Last I heard, she was doing her time at FCI Waseca, and word was she'd already filed 3 complaints about unfair chore rotations. Old habits die hard. Greg Morton, meanwhile, had gone into witness protection. Or maybe he just shaved his head and moved to Florida. Hard to say. Nobody missed him. Lancer Horizons tried to claw back its public image with some press fluff about corporate restructuring and renewed ethical standards, but no one was buying. Developers lost their appetite for our county fast. Land got harder to grab when owners weren't scared anymore. Becky and I? We healed, mostly. There were nights she still flinched when motion lights triggered outside, and I still kept a loaded Glock within reach, just in case some HOA diehard thought about a citizen's visit. But there was peace now, too, the kind that seeps back slowly, like color returning to frostbitten skin. We took a vacation, our first in years, rented a cabin in New Mexico, no neighbors for 5 miles, just trees, stars, and silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. On the second night, Becky turned to me by the fire and said, "I didn't realize how long I'd been waiting for the next knock. Neither did I. When we got home, I found a letter waiting for me in the mailbox, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a note, short and shaky. Thank you. I was too afraid to fight them. You weren't. You gave the rest of us a way out. EW. I didn't know who EW was. Maybe someone in the neighborhood, maybe a homeowner from another town. Didn't matter. That single sentence meant more than the $300,000, more than the press interviews or the courtroom wins. It meant I'd done something that lasted. In the months that followed, the DOJ's HOA Integrity Watch program released its first report. 23 HOAs across Texas under investigation, 7 already facing dissolution, 2 developers indicted for property fraud and zoning manipulation. My case had lit the fuse. A journalist reached out, same guy who'd covered my story early on. He asked how it felt to be a national face of homeowner rights. I laughed. Told him I was just a guy who didn't like being locked in his own damn house. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was about control, about how easily some petty bureaucrats and corporate parasites could turn paperwork into weapons, and how quickly neighbors could go from waving over fences to filing false violations and pepper spraying your wife, all because someone told them they had the right to enforce aesthetic harmony. Screw that. Property should mean freedom. And freedom shouldn't come with fine print. On the 1-year anniversary, Becky surprised me with a gift. It wasn't a watch or a tie. It was a plaque, heavy metal, laser-etched, bolted to a post by the gate. It read, "They tried to box us in." We built a wall instead. That night, we sat on the porch, watching the stars again, just like we did before all the madness. Except this time, there were no motion lights, no meetings, no clipboards, just quiet, just home.